Ohio's East Palestine train derailment on February the 3rd this year brought about one of the biggest environmental hazards to hit the US in decades, and it's led to the evacuation of residents within a 1.6-kilometre radius of the site, as hydrogen chloride and phosgene has polluted both the air and the waterways. Now, residents of East Palestine now face the prospect of lifelong illnesses and possible death, and it took a visit by former President Donald Trump to the area to get Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg to visit the accident site weeks after the incident took place, drawing consistent criticism from the public and demonstrating that Buttigieg isn't up to the job. It's also been 1 year since Russia invaded the Ukraine, and the question now is, does Putin have an exit strategy? And we're also going to cover, with Pakistan's economy near meltdown after ravishing floods and COVID, millions of Pakistanis now face poverty. Join us once again to discuss this is our North American and European correspondent, all the way from Canada, Michael A. Chabon. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Michael. First of all, I want to say congratulations on your marriage, and it's very nice to have you back. Unfortunately, there's the ring. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good news. The Norfolk Southern train that derailed was 150 cars. And East Palestine is basically a population of about 4,700 people, and they had to have a controlled burn release of all this material that was in there due to the fire, etc. Residents were complaining about sore throats and potential long health consequences. Federal officials repeatedly said that there was no detection of any dangerous levels of chemicals, and that the train had roughly 20 cars only that carried hazardous material. But one such material is called chemical, which is called a vinyl chloride. When burned, turns into hydrogen chloride and phosgene. So hydrogen chloride, it has a strong irritating odor, and it's extremely corrosive to the tissue if it comes in contact with anybody's tissue. The EPA officials, they said that they did testing in the air in the homes of Palestine and revealed that there was, ready for this is their quote, no exceedance was found inside the homes or in the local air. Well, the EPA has ordered Norfolk to clean up the contamination and pay for all the costs. But some residents, they're complaining of headaches, coughs, rashes, and there is indication of chemical exposure. It was reported that 3,500 fish had died. And yes, you're right. There was lots of criticism because there was no political representation from the federal government of the United States that turned up there. They were totally ticked off because Biden went to visit the Ukraine and give them millions and millions of dollars, but didn't come to Palestine and didn't give them any assistance. And Donald Trump, here we are, the declared Republican candidate running for president, goes down there on his own dime and starts talking to the people and finding out what's going on and making public statements. And Pete Buttigieg, they called him Pothole Pete because of the questionable mayoral management job they did before getting this administration job. He showed up and he just made a mess of it. And nobody there has any confidence in the federal government, or for that matter, in Pothole Pete Buttigieg. If you consider that in 2023, this year already, there's been 23 train derailments in the United States, and they figure it's one every 1.5 hours. So there is going to be long-term effect. And Pete Buttigieg just screwed it up. The Democrats screwed it up, and the Republicans came in on a white horse with Donald Trump and basically said, what's going on? And it's just embarrassing. It was just embarrassing. You got to feel sorry for those people in Palestine.
Opportunistic from President Trump or former President Trump, or a genuine move to shine a light on what needed to be done?
Both, I would say both. Number one, first of all, it was the right thing to do. There should have been some type of governmental and political representation there immediately. When you see videotape of these train cars burning there and smoke coming up, and it was just absolutely terrible. They should have gone there absolutely right away. There should have been a huge impact there from a political standpoint. And why would you blame Trump? These are people that voted for him in the last election, and it was more than 2 weeks until Pete Buttigieg descends there. And like I said, Biden goes to the Ukraine and gives billions and billions of dollars. And here's these 4,700 people who are living in this town in Ohio, and they're affected, and no one gives a crap.
And
it's terrible.
Yeah, and as the Secretary of Transport, has he ordered any audits on the tracks? Any other safety measures?
So there was all this malarkey about how in the Trump administration they had eliminated certain safety aspects, and that was not true at all. There was only safety. One safety element was eliminated, and had nothing to do with cars that are containing toxic goods. And supposedly, way down the track, almost half an hour before, there was a monitor that picked up overheating of one of the wheels on the rail car, which they believe was what incited the fire, but nobody was alerted to that. And the problem is that they took away the gasoline from the United States, so diesel went up. So if you can't put it on a truck, you got to put it on a train. So there's more hazardous material which is being traveled by train than what used to be done by truck or by a pipeline. So I mean, it's a vicious circle. But needless to say, Pete Buttigieg absolutely screwed up, and so did Joe Biden. They should have paid way more attention. Way more attention.
Now, back to Ukraine. We're a year in. Does Putin have an exit plan here? How does this end?
Well, listen to this. I mean, if you consider the UN voted in a resolution that Russia should leave Ukraine, big deal. There was a bunch of countries who didn't want to support that. North Korea, Turkey, Syria. But everything that Putin did in this war did exactly opposite what he wanted to obtain or wanted to get accomplished. First of all, Russia had a stranglehold on European oil and natural gas. They lost all that. They didn't want to have a strong UN. Well, NATO and the UN is stronger now than ever because of what's happening. And since October, Sweden and Finland rallied to join NATO, and in July of 2022, it was ratified. They're not part of the defensive alliance, but they're part of it. It's estimated that Russia's lost between 134,000 and 200,000 soldiers killed and wounded. Ukraine has averaged about 100,000. 18 million Ukrainians have crossed the border. They have about 8 million official refugees, and they figure it was over 40,000 Ukrainians who have died currently. And the thing that is the most shocking, there's a city called Bakhmut. And if you've seen the images of Bakhmut, it looks like Hiroshima after the bomb. Everything is bombed out. Everything is flattened. Everything's on fire. And this is what Russia may hold on to as their semblance of victory. And it's because of the Wagner group, which is, and this was a private paramilitary group that was founded in 2014. And they're basically going to the prisons in Russia and letting out all the prisoners to come and fight, and have been accused of a lot of the atrocities. But let's look at the options. What are the options, Michael? Ukrainians going to surrender? That's not going to happen. Russia's going to surrender? That's also not going to happen. So does Crimea become a bargaining chip? Russia doesn't want to let go of Crimea because that's a gateway with wheat, and it's a gateway with water, so they're not going to do that. So what about the territory that's already been occupied? What are they going to do? Just retreat? It's not like they're going to be warlords or anything, because the Ukrainians are not going to return, number one. Everything is bombed to rat business. So what are you going to do? You're going to have a truce. And Russia's just going to kind of leave, and the Ukraine is basically going to be destroyed. The only shining light, and this was I did a little research here. If you recall, you won't recall, you're a young man, so am I would hope. April 3rd, 1948, $13 billion were given to Europe under what was called the Marshall Plan, or the European Recovery Plan. Now, can you imagine $13 billion back then? That would have been trillions and trillions of dollars today. But look at what happened to Germany. That was basically guilt money that the Americans put forth to try and rebuild Europe and make sure that it would have a strong economy. All this money that's being garnered away and put away, what do you think is going to happen to the Ukraine when they go and start to rebuild it up again? Russia's economy is back to the 60s. They've got sanctions. Everybody with any intelligence and money has left. He's conscripting people, getting prisoners to fight for him. It's terrible. Like the quality of life in Russia is going to be nothing. And everybody's going to put all this money into the Ukraine because it's going to be building, electricity. It's going to be everything modern and new. They're going to be the new shining light. So I think that's the only positive that you can take out of it. But a lot of military officials still believe that it's going to be a truce, and it's going to be this summer because Russia's going to try and do one more push. But it's terrible.
A similar situation to North and South Korea, possibly?
Well, I dare say if North Korea thinks that they're going to make a move and the world isn't going to step on them like a bug, South Korea is, they are a huge manufacturer of technology and goods for the rest of the world. They will not tolerate anything awry. And that little dictator, Kim Jong-un, his people are in poverty. They are kept in a bubble. That doesn't work either. And he's going to have a problem just as much as Japan, as I should say, China is going to have a problem. Their average mean age is between 55 and 65 years old. They have a population problem. They need workers. And now with the way the United States and the rest of the world with balloons and TikTok and all the rest of this business is becoming more aware of the fact that China is trying to rule the world, they are not going to be the go-to place to buy goods from. They are going to be in a problem. And unfortunately, when countries get in problems, what do they do to solve their economy and solve their employment problem? They have a war. So it's I don't know. It's very strange news, but I don't think North Korea is going to make a step, because if he starts to do anything out of line, they're just going to step on him like a bug.
Yeah. Now, Pakistan, are they having a bad run as well?
Well, their economy is on basically the brinks of collapse, Michael. January's inflation rate in Pakistan was 26%. They figure it's going to go up to about 33% if it really goes bad. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, 220 million residents. That's 220 million people who live in Pakistan. Over 1/3 of them are in dire poverty. They've had national blackouts. The rupee, which is their currency, is down by 20%. It's the lowest that it's ever been against the dollar. Flour has doubled in price in a country that eats flowers, eats that flour quasi tortilla and flour goods every single day as just the basics, right? 23 million children between the ages of 5 and 16 are not in school in Pakistan. And in 2022, they had the devastating floods, if you recall. Then they had COVID, and all that just basically generally crippled the economy. And the other point that's kind of disturbing is when you have a country that's run by military with the misplaced priorities for decades, and it's ruled by a caste system. There's lots of people who are indentured and servants and slaves, and then those with huge amounts of money. You have perpetual poverty. So the floods alone destroyed about 27,000 schools, and it's estimated that it cost Pakistan about $30 billion in damage, and they just don't have the money. The economy is going to melt down. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is negotiating with Pakistan with a $7 billion bailout fund. But Pakistan has to show that they're going to change their ways. I think Greece went through that as well, if you recall, when the IMF was there. And it's estimated now that Pakistan has about 3 weeks worth of fluid currency to pay for any of these stuff which is coming in. And the problem is the IMF gave Pakistan $6 billion in 2019 and another billion in 2022. So this $7 billion, which God forbid they're never going to be able to pay back, is basically ticking. So the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif didn't want to succumb to the IMF's policies, because he would have revolt in his country. Gas prices have been subsidized, etc. But he has no other option, because they're basically, with bankruptcy close to their doorstep, they're going to do that. But one of the things that is interesting, 30% of Pakistan's debt, guess who it's held by? That's correct, China. Exactly. China. I mean, can you imagine that? They hit China up for a $10 billion loan for a railway project. And China's, thinking about it. But I mean, the real alliance between Pakistan and China is their military. Pakistan spent $1 billion last year on nuclear weapons, $1 billion. And they're rated number 6 of the nations with nuclear weapons. I thought I'd just refresh your memory. Russia is number 1 with 6,000 nuclear weapons. The US is number 2 with 5,000. China, 3 with 350. France, 4th with 220. And Pakistan, 6th, 165 nuclear weapons, followed by India with 156, Israel with 90, and your friend and mine, North Korea, with 40 or 50,000. So it's a very scary situation. Again, when a government and a people teeter on bankruptcy and there is famine, there will be unrest. And when there is unrest, the military has to come in. And if the military comes in, they're going to take control. And that's going to be a problem.
And that whole region there where less than trustworthy terrorists go backwards and forwards and hide within the borders areas around there.
And it's very hard to monitor money, where it's going, where it's being paid, who controls it. I mean, there's so much graft, and it's terrible. So you have a big problem. They have a big problem. They really have a big problem.
Yeah. All right, Michael, we're going to have to leave it there. So good to be back on desk away from the honeymoon. So we'll chime back in next week, and I'll look forward to speaking to you then.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to everybody on The Informer. Look forward to talking to you again soon.